Where were your parents from?
My mother was born in Oklahoma, and my father was born in Missouri, and both of them, as I trace back their genealogy, started out in this country in Virginia. Where exactly they immigrated from, I don't know, except for the fact that when I was looking at my grandmother's genealogy, she was born in Iowa, and they had some pretty good records there that indicated that she had come from either Scotland or Wales. I'm not sure which because they put both of those countries' name as her immigration. Um, but she met and married her husband, um, who was always called Bun because his name was Bun Bennett. That was my grandmother's married name. Um, and he and a good friend of his called Mr. Burst got together and opened up a business that supplied all of the large equipment that the farmers needed to plant, plow, and recover their products to take in for sale. And that's how they made their money. And when my grandfather passed away, my grandmother was trying to run her 80 acres by herself. People were helping her, but it really wasn't enough. And so my dad knew the situation and decided that what he would do is take a year off of work and go back there with my mother and me, and we would go back and help my grandma get back on her feet. And in the process of doing that, um, my grandmother had two cows that she milked, and she had a little shack that she took the milk in, and it had the machinery to separate the milk from cream into the basics, and then it would get picked up and taken into town, and she'd be paid for it. Well, that wasn't making her enough money, and she had one of her lands full of corn, which was growing very nicely. And then she also had another section of land that had cotton on it that was also doing quite well. And a lot of her other land she kept as forest. And because she had the forest and the ease of getting animals out of the barn and right to go right into the forest and be able to get back easily enough, my dad went to the auction one day and bought some sheep, which my grandmother was not too happy about, but um, she got so that she enjoyed going out there and watching them, particularly when the lambs were born. And my father also bought a horse for me, and we used the horse to go out and make sure that the animals came in when it was time for them to eat. Um, and we had to watch them fairly carefully because there were coyotes in the area, and other neighbors had had trouble with coyotes and their animals. We did lose one animal to a coyote. We had to go out and find it because we counted the sheep and one was missing. So that was a sad thing. But then one of the happy things was when the sheep had their babies, their lambs, they stayed right where they had them. They wouldn't come back to the barn. So we had to go out and get them. And so I ride my horse because my dad would hand me the lamb, and we put the lamb up on the horse with me and head back for the barn, and mother sheep would follow us, of course. And that's how we got them back in, those that didn't come in by themselves. So that was kind of fun. One of the things that I ran into that really caused a problem was when I went back there, the school that they had was, we were 6 miles out of town. And the school was on my grandmother's property. He had donated a section of his land so that there could be a school, so that all the kids there wouldn't have to be going on a bus into town all the time, in and out. And it was a dirt road, so it was a problem when it rained. And so that was the schoolhouse. So my mother took me up there when I was supposed to start school. And when I walked in, I was really surprised because every grade was a row of seats. And there was a big furnace over in the corner of the room that we all had to take turns, 2 of us at a time, carrying a bucket out to the shed and get the chunks of, I guess it was, I don't know what it was, but anyways, black chunks of something that we put in the furnace to keep warm in the wintertime. But when I talked to the teacher up there, she told me that, she asked me what I had here in California, and I told her, and she said, well, you're not ready to go into 4th grade. I'm going to have to put you back in 3rd grade. And I said, no, I was doing good in California. Why can't I go into 4th grade? That's where I'm supposed to be. And she explained that I didn't know enough to go into the 4th grade based on what the other children knew. And I got mad and I walked out because I could walk back and forth to the schoolhouse because my grandma's home was just down the road. And my mother was very surprised when I walked in the door. She said, what are you doing home? And I told her. And I said, I'm not going back to that school. I'm not going to be put back to 4th grade. So when school was out, my mother and I walked back up to the schoolhouse. And we talked to the teacher. And the teacher reassured me that she would work extra with me, and that by the time that the school year was over, she was sure I would be ready to go on to 5th grade. I would not only catch up to 4th grade, but I would also do 5th grade work. And I didn't think that that was going to happen, but my mother talked me into giving it a try. And I did. And it did. It worked out. I had all the information I was supposed to have. I passed all the tests. So when I came back to California, which was a year gone, I had no trouble into moving right on in to 6th grade.
Was that your mom's side or dad's side that was from Wales or Scotland?
My mother's side.
And then what about your dad's side?
Don't have really much information on my dad's side. I went in Missouri to a couple of places and to the city halls, and they would give me the books of information about people and where they came from and what, if anything interesting happened there. I mean, there were, at that time, my dad was born in 1892. So back in those days, there were a lot of things going on in that country, including bank robbers and so forth. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if I found something that indicated one of my dad's relatives had been a bank robber or something? That would be pretty unique. But I didn't find anything like that. I couldn't find anything other than he was there, he lived there, that's where his parents were. And he didn't have, he had two brothers besides himself, 2 brothers. And both of them lived in Oklahoma as well. And In fact, I still correspond with my cousin, whose husband is the nephew of my father, and they're still alive, and they live in Arkansas, and they do a lot of volunteer work, um, helping people that get in trouble because of the disasters that happen there with often with the weather. And but they're so far they're doing all right. And then while I was at this genealogy, I was looking up more information about my family, and I was going through some records, and I came across the name of John Paul Jones. Actually, it was his brother's name that I found that I could document um, person by person by person by person who I already had proved were my relatives, and that and I can't think of the brother's name now, but our direct um, connection was to John Paul Jones' brother, not John Paul Jones directly, although it was his brother. So we now claim that we are related to John Paul Jones. That's the most exciting thing I've found about any possible celebrity or anyone like that so far in my searches.
Who is John Paul Jones?
John Paul Jones was an admiral in the United States Navy during the war with England, and following that, when the wars started to involve other countries. And he was well known, well respected. He was, as you could tell, moved to the position of admiral by the president then, at that time. And he died over in Europe. And I don't know why it didn't happen at the time, but I read in the documentation that that the must have been the president at the time when he found that or heard that John Paul Jones was buried in England. He had people go over there and remove him from that grave and bring him back to this country and had him buried here. So that was kind of an unusual thing, kind of nice to know that when we have heroes that have died one place, they're brought back home again, just like we try to do now with all the succeeding wars that we've been through.
What about Grandpa's side now?
Oh, then my husband's side of the family, uh, his dad and mother were both born in Germany. My husband's father was born in Dresden, Germany, which is a beautiful, beautiful city. And my husband's mother was born in a town called Micka. It's Muckaa. It's the way they spell it. And that's in what they used to call Eastern Germany, when the Germany was separated due to World War II. They separated the Russians and the people that supported Hitler during the war, combined, I'm sure with others that I don't know all of the history of it, but they built this wall. that separated Eastern and Western Germany. And Western Germany was in the hands of the Americans and the English, um, who were the primary people involved in World War II. And the Russians had control of the eastern part, eastern half of Germany. So that when that happened, my mother-in-law's family were all in East Germany, and she had made a habit of going back and visiting them from time to time. In fact, when my husband was only 4 years old, and it was early on before Hitler got on his high horse, that she took my husband, 4 years old, and went over there to visit her mother and her brothers and her cousins. And this was before the wall. And everything went all right, and everybody was very happy to see them. And she stayed there, I think, close to a year. And then she realized that something was changing. She had told me that you could just feel that something was wrong, something was happening, and it was not good. And she decided that she needed to get her son and herself out of there before they closed the gates, so to speak, and she wouldn't be able to leave Germany. At least she wouldn't be able to leave East Germany. So she did get them out on time, and just in time, as it turned out, because it was only about 6 or 7 months later that Germany, or Hitler, came out and made his declaration of being the savior of Germany and how he was going to get all these people that didn't belong there out and so forth. So she was lucky in that instance, and the problem that came home with her was the fact that while she was over there, my husband was just 4 years old, and so he learned German, spoke it fluently when she brought him back here. In fact, he couldn't speak English anymore when he came back here, and he was just starting school at 5 years old. And the kids made fun of him, of course, which is normal, to be expected. But because of it, he remembered that all of his life. And I asked him once, I said, why didn't you ever keep your German? It's nice to be able to speak more than one language. And he said, no, I don't want to speak German. I never wanted to speak German, and I'm not going to speak German.
How did Grandpa's parents come over from Germany originally?
Um, well, they got married over there in Germany, and then my father-in-law's brother had already. There were 4 boys, um, 4 brothers, and the oldest brother had decided to come over to the United States and see what life was here. I don't know whether he had some inkling about what Hitler was doing or whether something was happening then that made him very concerned, because I didn't know that much about them at the time. I just know what I heard from the family. And he came over, and then he sponsored my father-in-law and his wife to come over. And in those days, they had to go through a health checkup in Germany before they could be allowed to leave. And then when they arrived here, they had to go to Ellis Island and be checked again to make sure they weren't bringing in any bad disease or bacteria with them. And also, they couldn't come without being sponsored to guarantee that they would not become having to depend on the government. And so the oldest brother, who was already here, was the sponsor for his second brother and his wife. And then they came here and lived here in the Chicago area. Um, they got jobs as a butler and a cook. And that's how they made their living until they got well enough to move on. I'm not exactly sure why my father-in-law decided to come to California, but he did. And he worked for Walt Disney Studios for years and went to all over the world, Hawaii and England, and then all over the United States while they were making movies. He, he did a lot of John Wayne's, worked on a lot of John Wayne's movies, and he went to Hawaii when they made the film Hawaii. So he had lots of fun experiences, which he always shared with us when he got back. And it strangely happened that my father also had worked for a movie studio. He worked for 20th Century Fox. And so when Walter and I started going together and the two families met, the men immediately had something in common, and they just sat down and talked and talked and talked. And the women were left to talk themselves. And that was kind of how it started. And then Walter and I got married, and we were pretty young, but our parents decided that we were mature enough to handle it, so we got married in 1952, and we had 2 children, and Eric and Karen are their names. They were born here in Los Angeles, and our family has grown now. We have 3 beautiful grandsons. 2 were born in Arizona, and 1 was born here. And the youngest one, who is our son's son, is now in college. Our other 2 grandsons in Arizona are both parents now themselves. In fact, one just had their first child. So now we have a great-granddaughter and a great-grandson in addition to our 3 wonderful grandsons.